Strengthening casework practice related to risk and safety.
Hi, everyone. We'll be waiting just a moment for everybody to move into the live meeting space. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll be just another minute while everybody gets into the live meeting space. So I see we already have a question about the first in the series. It has not been posted yet, but we will provide a link at the end of this presentation of where you can watch for when it is posted. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We're just going to wait another minute or two for everyone to get into the live meeting space. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll be waiting just another minute for everyone else to get into the room. We have a large audience today, so it takes a minute or two for everybody to move from on hold into our live meeting space. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So good afternoon and welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar, which is the second in our series on risk and safety assessment webinars, strengthening casework practice related to risk and safety. My name is Elizabeth Kramer. I'm with Child Welfare Information Gateway, and together with the Children's Bureau, we are co-sponsoring a series of 3 webinars related to risk and safety assessment.
Housekeeping.
Before we get started, I just wanted to take a few minutes for some housekeeping items. First, all of your audio lines are muted at this time, except for our speakers. If you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A box. We will respond to questions at the end of the presentation. For those of you who are familiar with Zoom, there are 2 different places where you can enter content. One is the Q&A box, and that's where we'd like for your questions to go. And then we also have a chat box where you can chat within the group and also with the hosts and with the panelists. We would ask that you try to put your questions in the Q&A box so that we're sure to see them and to get them to our panelists at the end of the presentation. Sometimes the chats get a little bit busy and we don't want to lose a question in there. We are recording today's webinar, and we will be posting it to the ACF YouTube channel in approximately 3 weeks. So you'll want to keep an eye on that, and we'll provide a link to that at the end of this afternoon's webinar. And I would also like to invite you all to please complete our survey. We will provide a link to you at the end of the webinar, and we'll also be sending a link out at the end of the webinar. We really do use the survey results to help plan our webinar content. In fact, this series was really driven by a need identified by the field through these surveys. So I really encourage you to give us your feedback on the webinar. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Our first presenter is Christy Blanco. She currently serves as the Audit Operations Lead for the Unaccompanied Children Prevention of Sexual Abuse Audit Project in support of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Ms. Blanco has over 19 years of experience in the field of child welfare in various roles, including direct service, leadership, professional development, policy and program development, implementation, and technical assistance. She has facilitated multiple statewide work groups with a focus on improving caseworker assessment practices and increasing agency capacity to ensure child safety. And she has also provided consultation and technical assistance in the development and implementation of statewide assessment review processes. Her expertise includes safety and risk assessment practices, CQI, and change management. Christy is joined by Ann Graham with the Child Welfare Capacity Building Center for States. Ms. Graham serves as a tailored services supervisor for the Center for States. She has over 20 years of experience in leadership, capacity building, administration, and professional development in child welfare. She has expertise in implementation, change management, CQI, and safety. In her previous work as the director of the Center for Professional Excellence in Child Welfare, Ms. Graham leveraged her expertise as an assessment worker and supervisor in her leadership and coordination of professional development team, providing workforce development opportunities to child welfare professionals. She worked closely with the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families and local consultants to provide statewide training systems development and delivery to child welfare professionals. I'd like to thank you both for joining us today, and at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Christy to start our discussion.
Dark-haired, bespectacled Christy Blanco.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Agenda.
I'm going to quickly go over the agenda. Thanks everyone for joining us today in our discussion of casework practice as it relates to safety and risk assessments. Today we're going to go over child welfare decision making. Within that, we'll discuss some common variables and challenges, how these can lead to the use of cognitive shortcuts, and the impact this can have on work. We'll cover assessments, discuss the purpose and intended use of standardized tools, the need for ongoing and accurate assessment, and the child welfare worker's role in assessment. Cover risk and danger, discussing what each is, how they're different. We'll talk through some risk and protective factors. We'll talk through safety decision making. We'll have some examples, and then we'll talk about elements of effective safety plans. From there, we will go into quality supervision, where we'll talk about what that entails, how child welfare workers can utilize supervision to best meet the needs and ways, best meet their needs, in ways for supervisors to ensure they're meeting their staff needs. We will have a resource slide at the end, and then we'll take questions. And just a quick note for you all, you'll hear Ann and I say from time to time that this resource is associated with what we're speaking about. It's hyperlinked on the resource slide of the PowerPoint, which will be made available to you all at the end of the call. All right, next slide, please.
Tell us about you.
So before we jump into our topics, we wanted to get a feel for you, where you all are at when it comes to risk and danger. Tom, would you please launch the poll? So on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you consider yourself? 1 is, I am not at all confident that I understand the difference between risk and danger. And 5 is that I'm an expert in all facets of risk and danger. We'll give you a few minutes, see where you're at.
All right, Christy, we'll just leave this open for a few more seconds here. Let folks get those last votes in.
Great, thank you.
So if you haven't voted yet, I'll ask you to do so soon. All right, we're gonna close it out and take a look.
Great. So everyone, for the most part, a lot of people feel like they're in the middle, 3 and 4, that's awesome. Some people are in the expert range, some really aren't sure, and that's okay. I think it depends on your experience in the field. Does this sound about right to everyone in the audience? If this is what you were expecting, can you give us a thumbs up, please?
I see a lot of raised hands. We don't have a thumbs up feature, so. But now we see him. Now we see him in the chat. There you go.
Raised hand, thumbs up, it's all the same. Thank you for participating.
All right.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, everyone. All right. I see lots of thumbs
A
up.
Venn diagram shows 3 overlapping circles labeled individual, community, and family.
Thank you. So just to set the foundation, child maltreatment is viewed as the consequence of the interplay of a complex set of risk and protective factors at the individual, family, and community, as well as societal level. Child welfare workers are charged with examining this complex interplay of risks and strengths that are unique to each referral in order to make decisions that significantly impact the outcomes for children and families. A clearer understanding of the multiple factors that lead to child maltreatment allows workers to focus on solutions and strategies to mitigate danger and reduce the likelihood for repeat maltreatment, while also fostering support and building on the strengths and potential for growth inherent in each family. Next slide, please.
Variables in child welfare decision-making.
So these complex decisions are influenced by a variety of factors, and they happen at different levels. We have on the screen the case level, the worker level, and broader contextual levels. The case level variables include characteristics of the maltreatment event. So for example, the allegation type, who the referring party was, the severity of the abuse or neglect, and characteristics of the child and family. And these, for example, could be the age of the child, which directly relates to vulnerability, household makeup, history of priors, additional contributing risk factors, as well as protective factors. When we have risk and safety assessment tools, they use these case level variables to aid risk and safety decision-making. But although the influence of case level variables on child welfare decision-making are some of the most thoroughly researched and most well understood, there are worker and context level variables that have been shown to impact the decision-making process as well. So at the worker level variable, we have caseworker experience, which can impact decisions, characteristics, and individual biases. There have been a number of studies that have found significant associations between these variables and patterns in child welfare decision-making. For example, some studies show that workers with more experience and higher self-rating of their skills are less likely to substantiate a case. And other studies suggest that workers who have experienced more adverse childhood experiences of their own are also less likely to remove a child. Context level variables include those at the agency and system level. These are variables that often can differ between jurisdictions and agencies, sometimes office to office, it depends. The larger ones at the systems level are access to services without a substantiated case. So is your agency one that can offer voluntary services? Because that might make a difference in whether you decide to substantiate a case or allow that to be voluntary and them to receive the services they can. The threshold for removal varies across jurisdictions and the climate and culture of the agency. Understanding these factors and the relationship to commonly used decision-making tools can help child welfare agencies use those tools with greater effectiveness. And the associated resource we have for that is Decision-Making in Child Welfare for Improved Safety Outcomes. If you could change the slide, please.
Common challenges in child welfare decision-making.
So in addition to all those variables we just talked about, child welfare decisions are made in complex environments with inherent uncertainty. So caseworkers have to conduct assessments and make decisions in the midst of strong family emotions with high expectations for accountability. And often child welfare workers are operating with limited time, resources, information, and available services for the families. This environment, along with the highly visible nature of child welfare decisions, can make consistent and effective decision-making challenging. High caseloads and pressure to come to safety decisions quickly may limit a caseworker's ability to collect sufficient and important information conducting these decisions. As a result, caseworkers at times are more likely to rely on cognitive shortcuts to help them make decisions. These include heuristics and individual biases. These cognitive shortcuts increase the likelihood of decision-making errors, but they also contribute to a larger issue that Anne's going to talk a little bit about now.
Burnett and Graham.
Great. Thanks, Christy. Persistent patterns of decision-making error can contribute to disproportionality within the child welfare system based on factors such as race, ethnicity, culture, and or socioeconomic status. A significant body of research has well documented the overrepresentation of certain racial and ethnic groups in the child welfare system relative to their representation in the general population. With disparities occurring at every major critical decision-making point along the child welfare continuum, implicit racial bias, known as unconscious attitudes and beliefs, and explicit racial bias, or overt acts of discrimination and prejudice, may impact families of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds during the reporting, investigation, and substantiation and out-of-home placement phases of work. Vague agency definitions, as well as those combined with insufficient cultural responsiveness and cultural humility training and practice expectations for caseworkers, allow subjectivity and bias to enter into decision-making, which impacts children, youth, and families. These shortcuts, mental notes, biases and error and critical thinking compound over time to create persistent patterns of individual and organizational practice that further harm marginalized children, youth, and families. We must move beyond cultural competency training and commit to deliberate, individual, and systematic anti-racist approaches to child welfare practice. One of the resources that we attached is child welfare practice to address racial disproportionality and disparity from Child Welfare Information Gateway. Check that one out in the resource slide. Next slide, please, Elizabeth.
Assessment tools alone are not enough.
Thank you. So assessment tools alone are not enough. To address disparity and increase consistency in child welfare decision-making, the field has increasingly shifted from practitioner-based decision-making, which can be vulnerable to bias and mistakes, to more data-driven processes using structured assessment and tools. There are multiple different assessment models, assessment-making tools that agencies can use at various stages of working with a family, from screening, referring for prevention supports, assessment to case closure. Some common examples are structured decision-making, or SDM, and Action for Child Protection, the SAFE model, which was featured in the previous webinar. These tools are meant to guide decision-making, provide structure and increase consistency of decisions, and decrease individual bias in the process of working with families. The use of valid and reliable risk assessment tools can help guide caseworkers assess safety and risk in families and reduce the bias and error in decision-making. Caseworkers who are working in organizations that have detailed and culturally relevant guidelines about what constitutes maltreatment may have an easier time for controlling bias. We know that poverty disproportionately affects communities with families of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. A critical step towards reducing racial disproportionalities in the child welfare system involves agencies issuing guidance and using culturally informed assessment tools that can help workers distinguish between poverty and neglect, and caseworkers applying that guidance in addition to assessing their own biases ongoing. It is important to note, however, that not all standardized tools have been sufficiently tested on children and families from different racial and ethnic groups. And these untested tools may actually introduce bias into the assessment process. They do not replace critical thinking. They do not replace good casework. Rather, they are designed to supplement solid practice. When used alone, they do not provide workers with a comprehensive picture of the family or help them engage in problem solving. Ideally, the integration of these tools, guidance, and clinical judgment allow child protection agencies to utilize data in the context of each family in their own unique situation. A resource associated here is the showcase of safety outcomes and decision-making approaches from the Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative. Next slide, please, Elizabeth.
Assessment.
Thank you. Caseworkers assess and reassess the risk of children who come to their attention initially and ongoing throughout the life of the case and their involvement with families to successfully mitigate the challenges that brought them to the attention of the child welfare system and inform decisions about supports and services that will help families strengthen their capacity to care for their children. This includes assessing prevention-related needs and supporting the connection of families to community supports. If done well, the assessment informs solid decision-making on safety and permanency and child well-being. Accurate and ongoing assessment is critical throughout the process. Children, youth, and families rely on the child welfare field to complete accurate assessments to help children stay in their home or determining best practices in reunification and supporting child well-being. Assessment validity is crucial for appropriate safety planning to occur. Continuing to assess safety and risk throughout the span of engagement with the family is the obligation of the child welfare system involved with the family to ensure that children remain safely in the care of their parents and family whenever possible and are reunified when safe to do so. Accurate assessment is critical to systems level efforts to help organizations determine who are child maltreatment victims, whether there are disparities in maltreatment and practice, and whether the systems can best allocate resources within the agency as well as the community. At the systems level, accurate assessment allows agencies to understand factors, contexts, mechanisms associated with child maltreatment and target community resources where needed. Take the time to prepare when you're about to support and reach your time with your children, youth, and families that you work with. Consider using a worksheet such as the Quality Contact Caseworker Activity Sheet noted in the resources slide for you. And think about what you'll need to prepare before that contact with a family, during that contact, and after. Thanks, Christy. If you could share more information, that would be fantastic.
A full, complex, and unbiased understanding of
slide.
families,
Never mind.
including their challenges, strengths, values, and goals.
Child protection staff must remain aware of the impact that disproportionality and racial disparities has on families involved in child welfare. This includes the impact of historical trauma that the child welfare system has had on families of color and poverty. Continuously work to understand their personal biases, its impact on decision-making, and commit to anti-racist practices. Ensure decisions are driven by ethics and safety while focusing on the goals of providing support to families. Partnering with families, empowering families, and working towards making families stronger. Involving families in the assessment and the decision-making can support positive outcomes throughout the engagement with the family. Caseworkers have a responsibility to recognize and value the diversity of families that they serve and to understand cultural competency and cultural humility as an ongoing process rather than an end product or a point-in-time activity. Caseworkers' behavior towards families can significantly increase the chances that positive relationships will develop and continue. The caseworker's role is to empower individuals to identify, develop, use resources that will support strengthening factors, as well as identify and leverage resources that are going to support the family. This requires avoiding seeing families as victims, instead helping them discover their strengths, their protective capacities, their formal and informal supports, as well as resources that can help resolve child protection concerns. Practicing empathy allows caseworkers to have a full and complex, unbiased understanding of the families that they work with, as well as the goals of those families. Again, the resource from Quality Matters, improving caseworker contacts with children, youth, and families from the Capacity Building Center for States, also in your resources available, will be another great place to look for additional information. Christy, this seems like a great time to dive further into danger, risk, and safety.
Christy Blanco,
Thanks, Ann.
assessing for safety and risk.
So you heard Ann talk about accurate and ongoing assessment. In order to be able to complete accurate assessment, we really need to have a solid understanding of danger and risk. So first and foremost, we need to recognize that danger and risk are not interchangeable terms. Danger is defined as a condition in which the threat of serious harm is present or imminent, and the protective capacities of the family are not sufficient to protect the child. Danger applies to the need for action, and based on the immediate or impending threat of harm to a child, it will vary what that action looks like. When caseworkers assess for safety, they're gathering information on threatening family conditions and current significant and clearly observable threats to the safety of the child or youth. They're doing the same thing, gathering and analyzing information regarding the child's vulnerability and protective factors of the family. Risk, on the other hand, refers to the likelihood of future maltreatment to a child, even when immediate safety threats are not present. Risk is also represented on a continuum from low to high, which is different from danger. When caseworkers assess for risk as opposed to safety, they're collecting and analyzing information to determine the degree to which key factors, those risk factors or protective factors, are present in a family situation that increase the likelihood of future maltreatment to a child. Both safety and risk assessments are foundational to identifying the issues facing a family, designing a plan, and providing services to support the family in addressing the issues. And without accurate assessment, it's going to be difficult to do this. Next slide, please.
Risk.
So in order to better understand risk and danger, we thought it would be useful to look at some examples and then, of course, use some polls and ask you some questions. On the right side of the slide, you can see all the risk factors that are associated with heart attacks. So we have diabetes, high blood pressure, overweight, smoking, high cholesterol, family history. So same as in child welfare, and the medical model now, a medical professional will gather and analyze these risk factors and use these to determine an individual's risk level for a future heart attack. The more risk factors someone has and the less protective factors, the more likely they are to have a future heart attack. If someone is deemed at high risk for a future heart attack, though, this does not mean that they will have a heart attack because the risk factors can't predict that for certain. And that's the same in child welfare. Simply saying they are more likely or less likely than someone else. Also, just in child welfare, medical professionals will take this information that they've learned after gathering, analyzing, then they'll provide services, interventions, resources to reduce that particular individual's risk for a future heart attack. Now, those are going to be based on what that individual's risks or protective factors were, right? So they're going to vary between someone who is a smoker and someone who's not a smoker, someone who's overweight and someone who has high cholesterol. So the types of interventions will ultimately make up the plan, and that's going to be uniquely tailored to meet the individual's needs, just like in child welfare it is for the family. Next slide, please.
A graph labeled Individual A, Individual B, and Individual C.
Now we're going to get ready for a poll. So we have individual A. They are 75 years old, considered overweight, have high blood pressure, and they're a smoker. Individual B, 25 years old, healthy weight, no current medical conditions or concerns, and they're a non-smoker. And individual C, they are 50 years old, they have high cholesterol and a family history of heart disease. They're also a non-smoker. Tom, could you please launch the poll? Who would you consider to be at highest risk for a future heart attack based on the information that we have?
All right, Christy, this is a pretty easy poll for folks to complete. So we'll give folks a few more seconds here to get those votes in.
Sounds great.
And some folks are also using the chat as well. But you can use the poll if you want. We're going to leave that open just a few more seconds.
Great.
All right. Here you go.
Right. So the majority have chosen person A, and there are people who thought maybe person B or person C. And I think, we have very limited information, and this is probably where we could use help from a standardized assessment tool, potentially with our critical decision-making and thinking skills, as well as supervision. This is great. Thank you so much. Now, can you tell me who you would consider would be at lowest risk for a future heart attack?
All right, Christy, no surprise. We've got a lot of quick answers that come through. So we'll give folks just a few more seconds.
That's great. People know their risk factors.
All right, just another second or two for anybody to get those last poll votes in. Okay, we'll close this out and take a look.
All right. Majority is for individual B. People do know their risk factors. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And we will go to the next slide, please.
Danger.
Now, if we use the same situation, we're going to talk a little bit about danger. So on the slide, you can see the common warning signs of heart attacks. And the first thing I hope everyone will note is that they're different. They're not the same as the risk factors that were on the previous slide. Here we have lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, jaw pain, neck pain, discomfort in the arm, pain in the chest, shortness of breath. So if someone were to present, an individual were to present with these symptoms, it's really not going to matter to the medical professional what their risk factors were that we just talked about. It could be individual A, who the majority said had the highest risk factors. Sure, if they come in, they say this is what's happening, they're likely going to take action and send them to the emergency room. But if we look at individual B, who everyone felt was the lowest at risk, if they come in and say they're presenting with the same symptoms, I don't think the outcome is going to be any different. The medical professional is going to take action because it seems like they might be in imminent or impending danger of having a heart attack. Thanks, Elizabeth. We will go to the next slide, please.
Protective factors and risk factors.
So now we'll talk a little bit about the same thing, but in child welfare. So in child welfare, risk factors are conditions, events, or circumstances that increase a family's chances for poor outcomes, including child abuse and neglect. These risk factors are associated with the likelihood of future maltreatment. So the same as the risk factors in the medical example were associated with the likelihood of future heart attack. Protective factors are conditions or attributes of individuals, families, communities, and larger society that mitigate risk and promote the healthy development and well-being of children, youth, and families. Protective factors such as concrete supports and social connections help parents build safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments for their children. And when you're completing accurate assessment, it's critical to look at both the risk factors and the protective factors. So there could be a multitude of risk factors, but the protective factors could outweigh it, or they could offset it. So we really need to take into account all the strengths of the family, as well as their areas for need. Some of the examples are up here on the screen. You can see risk factors, and this is just a few, but substance abuse, social isolation, financial stress, domestic or family violence, a history of priors with the division, a history of maltreatment, mental illness. And then the overarching protective factors are nurturing and attachment, knowledge of parenting and of child and youth development, parental resilience, social connections, concrete supports for parents, and social and emotional competence of children. All of these can help families. The associated resource that you'll see on the slide is Protective Factors Approaches in Child Welfare. And there is also a Protective Factors for a Strong Family resource, which is in Spanish. All right, now we'll jump to the next slide and we'll take another poll, of course.
Household A,
Take a look
Household
at
B,
child
and
welfare
Household C.
So in this example, we have household ABC, similar to individual ABC. In the first household, children are ages 2 and 3. Parents are married and in their mid-30s. They have no prior involvement with CPS. Dad's an ER doctor and mom's a stay-at-home parent. In household B, we have children that are ages 15 and 17. A single mom who's 43. She has a history of depression. One prior report with CPS due to domestic violence. It was a situation where mom ended up leaving to keep her children safe. Mom has supportive family in the area also. And household C, 12-year-old child, 28-year-old single father who was previously incarcerated for 3 years and is currently unemployed but receives supports from the state. 4 prior reports with CPS due to substance abuse. And the mom recently passed away from a heroin overdose, and dad does not have any supports in the area. So I think, Tom, if you could launch the poll, we are going to ask the same question. Which household would you rate as highest risk for potential future maltreatment?
All right, Christy, folks are getting in their votes in. We'll leave this open for just a few more seconds. All right, get those last votes in if you can. And we'll close this out and take a look.
Great. The majority is C. Again, this audience knows their risk factors. I'm going to ask, who would you say is the lowest risk? If you don't mind launching the poll, Tom. For which household, I'm sorry.
Thanks everybody for participating in these and sharing your thoughts or your ideas. We appreciate it. And we'll leave this open for just a few more seconds. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. There you go.
Awesome. Household A. Great, the majority. Yes, that's fantastic. Just looking at the surface, of course, what we have listed here, I think the majority felt like household A would be at lowest risk. Thanks, Tom. So we've highlighted that danger and risk are not interchangeable terms, and that if there's imminent or impending danger, we need to take action. So keeping this in mind, we're going to take a look at one. I think this is the last poll, I promise. One more poll, and I'm just going to read you a little scenario. And then if Tom, you could launch the poll after that, that would be fantastic. So, can you go back one slide? Thank you. So we're looking at the same 3 families here. Nothing's changing. This is all the information we have. So we receive a report for lack of supervision. All the information we have thus far is up on the screen for everyone to see. Based on the little information that we know at this point, which household would you consider to be in imminent or impending danger if you showed up and there were, in fact, no caretakers home or available? And then if you could launch, oh, that was the last poll we have in there. Okay, if you could type it in the chat, that would be amazing. Oh, people are typing really fast. Awesome. Give everybody just another minute. Great. Sorry about the poll, but I've been looking at the chat. I'm sure everyone can see it, and the majority seems to be pretty consistent with household A. Yep, and someone actually just wrote ages of the children. Exactly. So yeah, even though this family was at the lowest risk, when we take into account other pieces, and this one in particular was the age, which makes the child more vulnerable. And that was probably the one factor that weighed out the most in making them the household that was at imminent risk, or I'm sorry, in danger. All right. Let's change the slide, please, Elizabeth.
Safety decision-making.
Thank you. So let's talk about what's involved in safety decision-making, which is part of what you all just did. A safety decision is a determination of whether a child is safe or unsafe. So to make this determination, caseworker identifies the factors that directly affect the safety of the child, and then weighs or balances those factors directly affecting the child's safety against the family or caregiver's protective factors to determine if the child is safe. The safety decision guides the course of the action the child welfare agency takes when providing services and supports to the family, which Anne had touched on earlier, again, with accurate assessment. This is why it's critical. A decision of safe means that there is an absence of safety threats or protective factors are sufficient to assure protection. A decision of unsafe means that the threat of serious harm is present or imminent, and the protective factors are not sufficient to protect the child without CPS intervention, which means the caseworker needs to take action. So there's more than one option when taking action. I'm sure everyone has talked about this before, and different agencies use different terminology. It might not be safe and unsafe. I know some agencies use conditionally safe when they're involving safety plans, but we're all sort of talking about the same situation. So I want to run through a little bit about how you get there. So recognizing that the goal of child welfare, of course, is to keep children in their home whenever it is safe to do so. The child welfare worker must then make an intervention decision. So we made the safety decision, like in the last example, that, okay, those children aren't safe at the moment. So now comes the intervention decision. This, sorry. The intervention decision, sorry everyone. This is where they're deciding what services need to happen. They have to take multiple things into account, of course, but they're referring to the action taken to address the presence of this harm or future risk of harm. So the first step for the caseworker to decide is if an in-home safety plan and continued CPS intervention will address the safety threats. So to determine this, they must assess what interventions and services are needed to address what those safety threats were, what intensity they're needed at, like how many times a week, for how long. They need to identify if there are formal or informal supports, which could be family. It doesn't always have to be services in the community that can provide the interventions needed. They also need to ensure they're accessible and available, and assess the parent or caregiver's willingness and capacity to agree and abide by the terms of a safety plan. All of those things are critical when deciding if a safety plan can be used to mitigate the danger. If the safety interventions or services are not available or accessible to the family at the level the family needs, or if caregivers are unable or unwilling to accept and use the services, caseworkers then have to make a different decision. Caseworkers should consider whether the threat can be mitigated by an abusive caregiver leaving the home and a protective caregiver caring for the child, and if not, if out-of-home placement is necessary for the child. That should be a last resort. Before we transition to the next slide, if you guys could type in the chat what some elements of effective safety plans are that you know of, that would be great. I'll just give you a couple minutes. It's a little bit wordier than A or B. Just call out some things as I see them. I see a lot of collaboration, which is awesome. Written, monitoring, natural supports.
Yep.
Let's be clear about what everyone's doing.
Yeah. I was going to say, Christy, I see some clarity also.
Great.
Specific, I see
Yes.
also.
Everyone agrees, consensus. You guys are hitting everything.
Detailed.
Yeah, these are great. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
I think you might have touched on them all. Elizabeth, would you mind forwarding the slide? Oh, I like the smart. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Effective safety plans.
So because of the complexity and dynamic nature of the safety planning process and the decision-making process, as we talked about, there's no specific formula or model that you can follow. Just like in the medical model, the plan needs to be unique to the family. It's the same case here. It's going to be different regardless. You know, on the surface, it might look like 2 maltreatment reports are the same, or 2 situations of danger are the same, but every family has their own unique qualities, strengths, challenges, which means every safety plan should as well. There are, however, key elements of safety plans that really need to be included in order for it to be effective. I think you guys touched on pretty much all of them, but I'll run through them quickly for you guys. Safety plans are voluntary, temporary, and short-term. They must be able to be monitored. They're written agreements that require consensus, so they should be developed with the family and not for the family. All parties involved in the safety plan, including those informal supports, should be involved in the planning and should sign the agreement. An effective safety plan will outline realistic actions or activities that will help eliminate or mitigate any threats to a child's safety. They will also detail who's responsible for the actions or activities and under what conditions they must take place. The services outlined in the safety plan can be provided, like we mentioned, by both professionals, so maybe a childcare provider for that family that we just looked at, and non-professionals. Maybe there's a family member who can step up when let's say mom gets frustrated or she needs to go to the store and the kids have a difficult time going through the grocery store. Maybe there's someone who can support that. The plan has to have an immediate effect in controlling the safety threats, which I also saw in the chat. Strategies for long-term change, like parenting classes, other types of education, counseling, they don't belong in a safety plan. Those should be in a case plan moving forward, or an action plan. Some states use action plans if they're not opening a case. That would mean those are longer term and there's not an imminent danger. These safety plans should also be as minimally disruptive to the child and family as reasonably possible to keep the child safe. I think everybody seems to be pretty well aware of risk factors and safety, and I really appreciate everyone participating. And I think that this might be a good place, Anne, to talk about supervision and supports to help caseworkers in making these critical decisions.
Anne Graham, Quality Supervision.
Great. Thanks, Christy. Quality supervision directly contributes to employee satisfaction and the desire to stay on the job. Supervisors play a pivotal role in how staff experience the organization as a diverse, supportive, and inclusive workplace. Following Alfred Kadushin's model of supervision, quality supervision should have 3 different components or 3 aspects. Administrative, to address compliance with agency requirements. Educational or clinical, to address developmental needs and build critical thinking skills. This can look like coaching, modeling, other unique activities that support initial and ongoing learning for team members. Supportive supervision. These are activities targeted at attending to the social and emotional components of the work. With competing priorities, a lack of time and resources, high caseloads, it can be challenging not to get stuck in administrative supervision. Leaders in child welfare must move beyond checking the box or task-oriented supervision and engage in supportive as well as developmental conversations to ensure individual and organizational growth. The supervision experience might look different across the phases of continuum in child welfare. The questions, decisions, actions, a team member in the role of intake, referral, or hotline, as some states refer to it, may engage in activities such as debriefing a challenging referral call, developing competence using a screening tool, participating in on-the-job training related to a computer system. Those things will be unique to that role. A child welfare team member conducting assessments or investigations may participate in activities such as debriefing a particular assessment or visit, engaging in coaching related to conducting interviews of children, participating in ongoing training with their supervisor on the valid use of a safety tool that deepens and confirms their critical thinking skills related to determining safety versus risk. And caseworkers involved with families in an ongoing way may experience supervision conversations that deepen their learning and competence in developing actionable and targeted case plans with families that address the safety and support of children remaining in the home or returning home. Help assess the effectiveness of service providers in providing needed services, as well as coaching to support the ongoing assessment and risk safety. Next slide, please, Elizabeth.
Make supervision suit your needs.
In order to participate in quality supervision, prepare. Make a list of your questions for each supervision. Work to minimize your distractions and maximize your one-to-one time you have. When taking notes, write down key dates for follow-up and key words to help you remember information about families or information you want to talk about. If you're finding that you don't have time to get to all of your questions in your one-to-ones or your supervisions, talk with your supervisor about it and see if there's a different approach you can both agree on. Let your supervisor know how you learn best and don't be afraid to ask for help and offer your suggestions. You know how you best learn. And this same goes for supervisors. Supervisors need strong support from their supervisors. Consider what you need from your supervisor to be your best. Communicate. Let each other know what you need. Share your expectations with each other. Let your team and your supervisor know what's helpful to you so that you can receive the time and support that you need and know what to expect from others. There's additional information in the Supervising for Quality Child Welfare Practice from Child Information Gateway that will be an ongoing resource for you. Next slide, please, Elizabeth.
Moving beyond compliance-based supervision.
Moving beyond compliance-based supervision helps assure that there's ongoing attention to individual learning and growth in the role and the organization, as well as support, not just the compliance. Using open-ended questions require team members to think for themselves, and people are more likely to take action and become empowered if they're part of the process and the solution. This is a parallel process when we're working with families and engaging with families. None of this is new. Feedback should be positive and growth-oriented, constructive. Elements of better feedback include specific and objective information, delivered timely, and includes strengths and areas for improvement that encourages efforts to move forward. This also sounds pretty familiar to our communication style and communications with families. Flex your style based on others' learning. Coaching, field supervision, modeling, doing with, all support ongoing learning and can support improvement of skills, critical thinking, and transfer of learning from training to everyday practice. Don't rely solely on one-to-one virtual or in-person supervision meetings. Supervisors can support development by engaging in continuous quality improvement activities, including documentation review, case monitoring, and caseload monitoring, attending home visits and community meetings and case consultations with team members, all to provide on-the-job information and strengthen learning. In addition, reframing scenarios, information, practicing from a place of empathy, or seeking to understand may help team members consider varied perspectives. Help your team members understand the why behind the work. Let folks know the bigger picture and their role in the work, which helps team members better understand what is being asked of them, why, and how their activities and their roles impact others in the organization and ultimately families. We invite you to stay connected with the Capacity Building Center for States. Oh, positive. Next slide, Elizabeth, please.
Connect with the Center for States and Information Gateway.
Fantastic. Thank
Christy
you.
Blanco.
We invite you to stay connected with us by subscribing to the Capacity Building Center for States and Child Information Gateway. Figuring out who can help you, who can potentially answer questions, connecting with professionals from across the country and territories, accessing chat, national authorities, and research supports and more are available for you through both entities. Connect with the Gateway for resources, research, and library services and more. Links for those will be available in the resource page also. And I would be remiss, Elizabeth, for our next slide if I didn't invite all of you to join us on September 28th, 2022, starting at 10 a.m. for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo. So each year we host an annual expo with child welfare professionals from across the country. So we invite you to register and join us to talk and to learn more about the power in partnerships, prioritizing lived expertise in child welfare. I'll pop a link to the registration in the chat, and we'd love to see you there. Fabulous, Tom. You beat me to it. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Could we go to the next slide, please?
Resources.
Thanks so much. So I know you heard us reference this multiple times throughout the presentation, but these are all the resources that we referenced here on the slide. You will get a copy of the presentation after it ends. I'm not exact, it might be emailed. I think someone else might be able to tell you better than me, but they're all hyperlinked. And I think now, one, just want to thank you all. And two, we're going to take some questions from everybody.
Questions. Elizabeth Kramer.
So Christy, I can speak to what will be sent out. So this afternoon, evening, or tomorrow morning, you should receive an email. It will include a certificate of participation in this course. It will have the slides, which will include the resources page, and as you noted, is hyperlinked. It will include a link to registration for webinar 3 in this series that we'll talk about in just a moment. And it also will include a link to the webinar evaluation, and that's where we would gather your feedback on this webinar and any suggestions that you have for future topics. So be watching your email boxes for that. And at this point, I will go ahead and turn it over for questions. I'm not sure, Kara, Cynthia, are you all facilitating that? I know we've had some come into the question box.
Blonde Kara Kelly.
Yeah, I will go ahead and facilitate the question and answer. We've had a few of them come in here. So the first couple of questions here are related to the part of the presentation around danger and risk. So this specific question asks, can you discuss your perception of the difference between impending danger and risk?
Christy Blanco.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And I think I did see that someone, it was similar in someone's model. So for risk, we're looking at future would be what I think the most immediate thing is. For danger, we're talking about imminent. And when we say impending, it's very, very near. So if a child, you see they have, the parents haven't always been around at night, but they're working through it and they're not leaving them home alone. I know I'm going back to the other example. It's all that came up. And they have been on board and fine for a while. Some of those things that you'll think about was the fact that it happened previously. that they may have had resources and they didn't use them until we connected them or talked with them about a safety plan. So their risk would be higher than someone who's never had that same situation. But it doesn't mean the children are in danger right now. They'd be in danger if they were home alone and you showed up. Does that help? Or, it doesn't work exactly the same for other examples, but when I say impending, it's the very near future unless some sort of action is taken.
Kara Kelly.
Okay. The next one here is around the idea of assessing for poverty in risk and safety assessments. So specifically, the question was related to some of the case examples that were provided, in that in these examples, multiple of these families could potentially be at risk, but oftentimes SES becomes the focus of the assessment. So in what ways can we think about reframing our lens when we take into account things such as SES during our assessment with families?
Christy Blanco.
I don't know, Anne, if you want to, the first thing I can say for reframing or thinking about it differently, I think it's really critical to understand that poverty, financial stress, that's a contributing risk factor, just like anything else. A family that's very wealthy could very well have multiple other risk factors, and a family that doesn't have all the same resources may have a lot of protective factors, or they're just able to care for their child. I think the most important thing to say is that poverty or socioeconomic status lower does not equate to neglect.
Anne Graham.
Yeah.
Anne, more to add?
Absolutely, Christy, thank you. It makes me think about an instance where I was working with a new team member who had done work in another state or another jurisdiction, who was newer in the office, and I went to the home visit with her. It was a father with 3 little boys, and they were living above a barn. And that particular worker was really upset about the conditions that were there. We had a really good conversation with Dad, though. We had a really good conversation with those 3 boys, and it wasn't ideal of a situation, and it was not dangerous. The steps that Dad was taking to create safety and to secure resources did not equate anything more than referrals to community organizations for additional supports for him. And we had a really good conversation around, why, and that the idea being that this was an untenable situation for that newer worker in the office that required a safety plan or a safety intervention. We had a really good conversation that safety was achieved there. And we provided resources around mitigating some of those risk factors that may have been there.
Elizabeth Kramer.
Kara, I also would be remiss if I didn't note that our 3rd webinar that will be in September is really going to focus on the interaction between poverty and risk and safety assessment. So more to come on that as well. That was a fantastic answer from our 2 presenters today, but we can do a whole webinar on this topic, and we plan to.
Yeah.
Anne.
Great.
Kara.
Yes, thanks for that reminder. The next question that we have here is related to safety plans. Specifically, do safety plans have a deadline?
Christy Blanco.
Yes. I mean, that's a short answer. They should. If it's a safety plan, I mean, I can't say, what the deadline is, because their safety plans look different for every family, every jurisdiction. We don't know what the situation is, but they should be definitely short term. If it's something that needs ongoing, then it should possibly be a case plan or something. It should probably look differently. Do you have something? I don't know, Anne, what do you think?
Anne.
Yeah. So certainly time limited. Families don't deserve to live in limbo. So really thinking about what is needed for safety in the moment, and are folks able to coalesce around that and have consensus around these people will do certain things for a certain period of time until further conversations can be had around safety for the longer term. So definitely far more short term, if that's what deadlines mean. If we're reading that.
Christy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to, it's not one or the other, in my opinion. You might have a safety plan that's short term just to address the immediate safety threats, but at the same time, you're working on other action plans or case plans that might involve longer term steps to continue to ensure that child's safety.
Kara Kelly.
Okay, those were incredibly helpful. I have a cluster of questions here now specifically related to supervision. The first one is around how frequency. So how often should supervision be held?
Christy Blanco.
I mean,
Mm.
from my experience, weekly, but I'm sure it probably looks different in different agencies. And any thoughts? And it could depend on the experience level or the needs of the worker as well.
Anne.
I would agree, Christy. I would say if I'm a newer team member, weekly supervision is going to be helpful to help me put the pieces together around what I'm learning in training, what I'm seeing in the field, and what the work looks like on the ground in the community that I'm working in. As a more seasoned person, perhaps if you've been here for some time, for a few years, then perhaps it's every other week that you have real, true one-to-one time with your supervisor, so that you're sure that you are continuing to grow and you're getting your needs met and the questions asked and things like that. And maybe you have some separate check-in time around some of those administrative supervision, but that you do have your time around your development.
Kara Kelly.
That is related to a similar question. Given the recent increase in worker turnover rates in child welfare, what are some ways in which a supervisor can really meaningfully support new workers?
Anne Graham.
I would say it really is time, providing that time, that one-to-one time for folks that is protected to the best of its ability. So again, back to the slide around really working to minimize distractions. If you're able to position yourself with your computer or your in-person office around having some protected time to dive into questions and to have deeper conversations, really truly can be critical to that relationship and to developing competence and confidence in the work overall.
Christy Blanco.
And I would just piggyback. I think especially as a new worker, it's critical for supervisors to be able to flex their style, and not just the way they, you have to flex your style in general around how people learn. But I do think coaching and modeling and field supervision is really important.
Anne.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be remiss also, so this is a far longer answer, sorry, Kara, connecting those newer team members with others who are in the office who are a bit more seasoned, right? The supervisor does not have all the answers. And your team members are amazing, very, and have so much to contribute also. And there are some questions that, really is best one-to-one with a colleague. And so having people match up or do a visit together or join a conversation together as colleagues can also be an unbelievable learning opportunity for both folks.
Christy.
Yeah, those mentorships are, I think, critical in the beginning.
Kara Kelly.
Okay, we've had a couple of people here ask similar questions around the incorporation of reflective practice or reflective supervision in child welfare. What your thoughts, resources, specifically on that, on reflective supervision?
Anne Graham.
So reflective supervision requires active listening from both parties. And so to me, that goes back to the idea of really minimizing those distractions. It's really hard to actively listen to folks when the cell phone's going off and your messaging system is going off on your laptop and so forth, and folks are coming in and out of the door, whichever the door is, the virtual door or the actual physical door. And that really also requires the thoughtful questioning and open-ended questioning with both parties involved in that reflective questioning and active listenings to help uncover their own knowledge. As a newer worker, that can be really challenging to put all those pieces together. As a newer supervisor, to put all those pieces together as to what it is that I'm hoping to do. So folks may rely, that may be a reflective questioning or reflective supervision may be a little more challenging as a newer person to get the hang of. And it's necessary also for own growth too. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, I guess I would say.
Christy Blanco.
Yes, that reminds me of a particular staff member who I loved when she was new, and I would give her, she would ask a question. I would always say something like, well, what do you think? And she would be like, why can't you just tell me? Well, I think it's important to hear what you think and work through, the reasons why that may or may not work. So reflective supervision is critical.
Kara Kelly.
Okay, this is another supervisory related question. Often in child welfare, workers get promoted into supervisory positions. What are some ways in which workers can prepare for this transition? What if they get promoted from worker to supervisor? Do you have any resources, suggestions?
Christy Blanco.
Right off the top of my head, I would say something very similar to a new worker. A mentorship, someone that maybe was a leader for you that you really admired, going to them, asking questions, taking one-on-one time with them. The other thing I guess I would say is it does require a shift. The director of where actually both of us used to work would always say a super worker does not make a supervisor. And I think that is absolutely true. On top, you can know all the ins and outs of child protection, but being a supervisor requires you to do all these extra pieces, being able to manage people, being able to flex your style. So I really just think it's something that you need to learn. I don't off the top of my head have any resources. I am sure we can find some.
Yes.
Sam?
Anne.
So Shelby just popped up. NICWE's online resources are fantastic, and I was going to suggest resources through NICWE also. So NICWE is the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute. It's a mouthful, but they have fantastic information on there around supervision and around leadership. So you can poke through there and see what might fit there. The other thing I would suggest, in addition to what Christy noted, is moving from a team member to a supervisor will also ask you to reassess and reevaluate your relationships with your peers, because you are moving from a peer colleague to a different space. And so attending to that and what that means for those relationships is also really important, in addition to preparing for the role, period. This is a different team that you'll be working with in a different way now, and that's important to think about too.
Kara Kelly.
The next question here is around the intersection between supervision and protective factors. I know that we talked a little bit about that in the presentation. So what role do protective factors play in assessing for risk and safety in the field?
So
Christy Blanco.
protective factors play a big role, actually. It's when you're assessing for risk and safety, you're weighing both out. You need to determine what the strengths of the family are, what their abilities are, their capacities, and also the risk factors. You can't look at them in silos, because that's not going to answer whether someone's in danger or they're at risk. If I think I'd mentioned there could be a slew of risk factors, but really the protective factors might outweigh it, and the children are fine. And the same is true for when you're deciding if a child's safe or unsafe. The first thing you're looking at is, I mean, it could be something as simple as, I think Ann and I were talking about this before, and I don't know if you mentioned it today, but you know, you go into a home and there's a wood stove there and there's nothing around it and there's small children. You talk to mom and dad and they're more than willing to go and get a gate or something like that. I mean, they have that ability and they're willing, so it mitigates the danger, and that's what you're looking for. Their skills, their knowledge, building up on that to help them mitigate the danger rather than us always doing it for them, because they're the ones who will need to carry that through as time goes on. CPS isn't always going to be there, so it's helping them understand what they have for strengths and how to build that up. I'm not sure how, I might have missed the supervision part in all honesty. Was there another part to that?
Kara Kelly.
I think that answered the question. Just primarily, really, how do we incorporate the protective factors into our assessments? But I do have a follow-up question from that you talked a little bit about SDM and the Action for Child Protection models in the presentation. Do these instruments themselves incorporate protective factors into the questions that the workers are completing, or are protective factors something that the worker should gather on their own through their clinical work or their clinical practice and ask separately? How do those intersect during an assessment?
Christy.
Anne might be able to speak more to the specific SDM and action, but just quickly, I would say you should always use your clinical skills and critical thinking and when you're assessing, because the tools are meant to just guide and help. I'll kick the rest to Anne.
Anne Graham.
The Action for Child Protection, or the SAFE model, incorporates protective factors into that tool. So as team members are working through the tool, there are prompts around what are the protective factors that do exist, and that is embedded in that tool. The Structured Decision Making, or SDM tool, has a prompt around protective capacities or protective factors, whether they're present or not. And also really more so rely on the clinical judgment.
Kara Kelly.
That leads itself well into the next question that I have here. So a worker is out in the field, they collect all of this information through their clinical judgment, through their risk assessment instrument, and they're finding that what they are seeing clinically might be misaligned with the risk rating that they are receiving on their risk instrument. So in what ways could a worker use supervision in order to help make a decision about how to proceed forward with that misalignment?
Anne.
Christy, do you want me to start?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Either way. You want to keep jumping in? I'm like, oh.
So certainly taking that time to walk through the tool together and understand, have a conversation about what information helped that team member arrive at that decision or at that conclusion around the particular question that the tool is asking. So as a supervisor in the field, I would ask my team members to tell me all about the visit. So supervision sometimes took a little time. So I'm sorry, team members who I took too much time for in the past. But I really wanted to be there, and I wanted to know what it was that they saw, what it was that they heard, what the conversations were. And so that then helped inform how those tools were used, and whether or not they did in fact match. And so having those conversations about the particular questions, I think, can be powerful in also validating the questions too.
Christy Blanco.
Yeah, I would agree completely. Same thing. I think this really speaks to not just compliance-based supervision. So a lot of times that revolves around, did you make the time frame? How did you see every child in the family? It really means digging a little deeper and understanding the family for yourself, which I think is super important as a supervisor, because you are ultimately the one who's helping and responsible. All these families are really your families at that point. And I think to feel comfortable supporting someone and agreeing with the decisions they make, you would have to know more about the family. The only thing I would add is that at times when it's hard to determine, the staff members having a really hard time deciding like why it's, or explaining why that the supervisor can go with them on a visit and ask some questions themselves. And I think that I've done that many times, and it's really helpful, I think, for both, because then they see, I get a more solid understanding of what they're referring to. And then there's also that opportunity for some modeling.
Kara Kelly.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. And this one is about self-care. So we all know in social work practice and child welfare in particular that self-care is incredibly important. So in what ways can a worker use supervision to support or enhance their self-care in practice?
Anne Graham.
Ask. I mean, I know it sounds so simple. Don't open supervision or your one-to-one conversation with the first family at the top of the workload. Check in with each other. How are you doing? How are you finding this work? What are you doing this weekend? How was your evening last night? Really, truly, it sounds incredibly simple, but the genuine interest as humans of our team members it really goes a long way. And it's again, it sounds very simple, but really attending to your well-being and asking about things that people are doing in the off time that fill their cup back up is incredibly important also.
Christy Blanco.
I completely agree. Yep, seems simple, but I think asking those questions is critical, but also asking them in a way to find out, where they might be struggling, where they're excelling, what are you finding the most valuable about this work? Where you're really having a difficult time, like that can open the door to helping with that self-care and what needs to happen.
Kara Kelly.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Kramer.
Thanks, Kara.
Other webinars in this series.
So we have mentioned that, or I have mentioned several times that this webinar is one in a series of 3. We held our very first one on June the 28th, and it was Risk and Safety Assessment 101. Our presenter was Teresa Costello from Action for Child Protection. And this will be posted on childwelfare.gov in the next week or so. So please keep an eye on this page if you'd like to go back and view that recorded webinar. And then our third and final webinar in this series is Safety and Risk Assessment 201, Equity and Risk Assessment. And that is on September 27th, 2022 from 2 to 3:30. And the registration link is here. We also will be publicizing it through our various emails and listservs and communication channels. And if I could ask Cynthia or Tom to go ahead and pop the registration link in the chat as well, so that folks can go ahead and register for that webinar if you are interested.
Give us your feedback.
I've also mentioned several times that we have a survey available that you can access via this link or via the barcode on the right-hand side. I also will be sending a link to the survey in your follow-up emails. I would ask that you really take just a few minutes to complete the survey. It's quite short, but we get a lot of really valuable information from it that helps us plan for future webinars. So please take a few minutes and give us your feedback. I think with this, I'd like to go ahead and thank Christy and Anne for this presentation today. It was fantastic. All of these webinars leave me feeling like, wow, we could do an entire semester on just this topic. So you managed to pack a lot of information into both the formal presentation and your response to the Q&A. So thank you so much. I know how much work goes into these, and we really do appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. Cynthia or Kara, did you all have anything else that you wanted to close with?
Kara Kelly.
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here in attendance. I know it's always hard to take time out of your days to be present for these webinars. And again, I really wanted to thank Anne and Christy. You both did a wonderful job, and this topic is so incredibly important to the field. So thank you again for your expertise and for putting on this wonderful webinar.
Elizabeth Kramer.
Okay. Cynthia, any closing words?
Cynthia.
No, just thank you. And we look forward to hosting the third webinar next month.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again for your participation.
Christy Blanco.
Thanks, everyone.
Anne Graham.
Thanks all. Take care.